Hi guys, today we're talking about burnout. Burnout was first introduced by psychologist Freudenberger in 1974. He observed behavioral, emotional, and cognitive debilitations amongst overworked, overcommitted community workers. He described it as a negative work-related psychological state with symptoms of physical fatigue, emotional exhaustion, and demotivation. Soon after, in 1976, Maslach defined burnout as consisting of mental and emotional exhaustion, negative perceptions and feelings about clients or patients, where you might get depersonalized and cynical, in fact, and a crisis in professional competence, where basically you're not working at the professional level you know you're capable of. Now, what's interesting, as much as burnout you think may have been around for a long period of time, the World Health Organization, the WHO, only in 2019 for the first time added burnout to its international classification of diseases. How did they describe it? They took 3 criteria. Again, energy depletion or exhaustion, one most widely reported in literature and the most significant. And this can also include mental and physical fatigue. 2, they describe negativism or cynicism towards the value of one's work with detachment and withdrawal, feeling in fact like a cog in a machine, where you in fact feel insensitive, isolated from people, and distant. The 3rd criterion was the reduced personal professional efficacy. And you basically feel you're not working at the level you're usually capable of. You're not accomplishing, you're not able to be productive, and this impacts your self-esteem. Now, you might ask, what's the difference between burnout and depression? What you'll find, burnout is generally job-related and situation-specific, whereas depression can be as a result of any situation and circumstance and affects you in all spheres of life. Burnout generally will be something you will generally have found to have been a pleasant task or situation previously, now has turned different and not as positive as it used to be. And depression usually is an unpleasant task, situation, or circumstance. With burnout, we are overengaged, urgent, and active. Emotional numbness and fatigue materializes, and you might say, I just want to be left alone. Whereas with depression, you avoid engagement. We feel lethargic, inactive, emotional pain and hurt. And you might even well say, you don't want to be alone, or it's actually dangerous to leave the person alone. Now, what's the prevalence of burnout? As you can understand, with COVID, the pandemic, with our work requirements, our key performance indicators, burnout is becoming more and more prevalent. It's manifesting in people in any number of professions, and the number of people suffering from burnout is continuously on the rise. And given the demands of this modern work environment, the estimates of severe burnout varies between 2 and 7% in most working populations. And recognized in the past, burnout was focused more on health professionals, where they felt a greater prevalence of burnout because there's far more emotional engagement. But what we're finding is that even with people who engage with technology all day, and as a result, we are available 24 hours a day, we have far more life and work commitments. It's becoming more and more prevalent across the board. So what causes this burnout? Work environment is definitely a factor. The work environment leads to burnout because there's a mismatch between the individual and the job assignment. And this can be in terms of, we all know this, workload. More and more, we all have 24 hours in a day. But more and more, there's demands on that 24 hours. So it's not uncommon for me to find a patient coming in describing having to work 10, 12, 24 hours a day. I remember a guy says as soon as his strategy workshop ends, and this was around 2 in the morning, he gave me a call to say, geez, I know it's late, but he actually sent me a message saying, let's chat tomorrow morning. But this is when it ended at 2 in the morning. And the next day when we chatted late in the afternoon, asked him what time your strategy session started. The next day it started at 6. So you can just imagine the amount of workload that he's going through. And with that comes the lack of control, or let's put it another way, of autonomy. Another big deal, and a lot of us will identify with this, is effort-reward imbalance. the amount of effort you put in. A common question I ask most of my patients, do you feel you get paid enough? I still have to meet the person who says, yes, I am. All right? We all feel the effort we put in is not met with the appropriate reward. A fourth factor is the lack of community, camaraderie, and affinity. And what this does when you're working is that there's a lack of connection with others in the workplace. In fact, connection allows you to work longer hours because you feel, hey, we're all one family, we're all one team. And even this can get worse when there's unresolved personal conflicts within the work environment. That can be definitely destructive. Another big factor is more so in the workplace, we're faced with lack of fairness or justice. And this creates emotional upset and definitely leads to cynicism. Another big factor is values. And this is where the individual and the institution values may be inconsistent. We see this often. As you can imagine, in organizations which are caught up with fraud or corruption, there's definitely generally sometimes an individual is faced with making an ethical choice versus the organization's choices, which may not just be based on ethics. Then, many of us, in terms of our characters, we predisposed to burnout. And they say that certain personality traits have been linked and are definitely linked with higher rates of burnout. This is where you may be a perfectionist. By nature, some of us struggle with making decisions. Also, that can make things worse. Self-criticism, inflexibility, idealism of what you expect your workplace to be, and lack of empathy. Individuals who are single are more prone to burnout, and individuals who are meek or have a low self-esteem are more so also prone. In contrast, the classic type A driven personality, interestingly, is also prone to burnout, particularly with the exhaustion component. Similarly, individuals with high job expectations are more so prone to burnout because they place high expectations on themselves and their cup, as we're now describing it more and more so, has become depleted. They cannot give as much. There's a point you reach where you literally break down. Another huge factor we need to look at in terms of burnout is the work environment consequences. And what's happening, we find with burnout, and this is where organizations need to recognize why burnout is not good, is that it's costing the organization because it relates to and it causes employer-employee conflict, poorer job performances, higher absenteeism, poor morale, chronic work disability, physical health impediments. The more and more days we then end up being sick from work, and even results in definitely hospital admissions due to medical and mental disorders. Burnout has been associated with substantial excessive risk of medically certified sicknesses for both men and women, and this results in higher absenteeism. In fact, in a survey done in 2004-2005, showed that absenteeism caused by stress is estimated to cost the UK economy £3.7 billion per year. In the National Health Service, the British NHS, it's believed that this accounts for 30% of sicknesses in terms of absences, and this costs the service £300 to £400 million per year. Poor work-related mental health is therefore associated with enormous economic costs. So, what are the psychiatric, medical, and social sequelae as a result? Burnout has led to anger issues, substance abuse, depression, or at worst, even suicide. Although defined as a psychological syndrome, it has numerous physical manifestations. For example, those who experience burnout will report headaches, GIT, gastrointestinal disorders, and sleep disturbances. Poor work-life balance and sedentary lifestyles lead to poor diet and obviously weight issues, as we all seem to experience. The subsequent poor health maintenance further facilitates other mental illnesses such as diabetes, cardiac illnesses, etc. There are definite personal, family, and social consequences as well. It is not uncommon in society to place work aspirations above and beyond family, and this leads to failed relationships, be it with your spouse, children. This leads to work-home conflict, and sadly, ultimately divorce. All this creates a series of negative feedbacks In fact, it creates what we'll call a vicious cycle, which just leads to a downward cycle and spiral. So what then would be a solution to burnout? What we describe is work engagement. And work engagement is defined as a positive, fulfilling state of mind characterized by vigor, dedication, energy, involvement, efficacy, and being free of the cynicism and lack of efficacy. Now, when I raise this with people, they say this was how they were 10 years ago. And the problem is they have been on this rat race, this hamster wheel for so long, they've forgotten the reasons why they originally started working for the organization, and they've lost their purpose and meaning in their work. What we find is that engaged employees have a far more effective connection with their work activities. Perhaps the most important component of job engagement is to accept that personal well-being, both physical and emotional, is as important as work-related success. It is important to honestly define your own personal and professional values and goals. Then select a career path in terms of your work environment. Now, it's very important as you work to shift, to tactically, if I use the word pivot, to recognize that you fit in and your work fits in with you. Another huge factor that's seen as a protective factor against burnout is emotional intelligence. Now, what is emotional intelligence? It is the individual's ability to perceive, process, and regulate one's own emotions and the emotions of others. It informs how an individual internally manages the emotional and environmental stresses, as well as how one may navigate relationships with others. EI, as we may call it, has been associated, in fact, with less mood deterioration and emotional reactivity following stresses. Those with higher EI are better equipped to handle stresses associated with work. Another important factor is, as we've described in other videos, is work-life balance. Work-life balance is defined as being not only about family and children, nor is it about working less. It is in fact about working smart, about being fresh enough to give all you need to both work and home without jeopardizing one or the other. In fact, maybe we need to call it work-life tension, because that's what you'll find you need. One has to help the other and the other helps the one. It is necessary for everyone at whatever stage of your life you're in to be able to pull through. And there's basically, you and I need to develop personal strategies to help with work-life balance, making sure that you meet the demands, the values of every person in your life and your work commitments. So what you and I need to do is then define personal and professional values, select the appropriate job and specialty, define limits, develop strategies to respond to stress, maintain your supportive relationships, take care of personal needs, sleep, nutrition, exercise, health, accept the personal limitations, be positive and thankful, express your gratitude and appreciation. There are unlimited number of strategies now coming into place to reduce stress. We all know these, and these include exercise, volunteer work, religious activities, social organizations, amongst others. And yes, last but and probably the most important though, is to remain positive and thankful. Gratitude and appreciation for whatever we have in life, which you consider absolutely important. Now, it may sound a lot of these solutions is difficult given the demands of your workplace, but I think we are also approaching the era where we have to move away from competition in a workplace to creating your own workplace. You and I need to be, I'll use the word, innovative and artistic as to how we see the future. The future in terms of Generation Z, who are demanding that they live life in terms of work on their own terms because they've seen what the older generations have been through. Very important, lastly, in terms of burnout, yes, it may get to a point where you feel you're completely overwhelmed, overburdened, and you cannot cope, where mentally, emotionally, it has just become far too dysfunctional. It is very important then that you consult a mental health professional, and then they will take the appropriate measures to help you further. So till next time, see you then. Subscribe and we'll be conducting more such videos. Take care. Bye.